The Christian Girl and Her Muslim Apostate Lover. A novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This story is narrated in 3 books. Book 3. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer who may quote brief passages in a review to be printed in a newspaper, magazine, school journal, or university article. This novel is a work of fiction, but the entire story is based on the actual life of a Muslim apostate girl in Sudan. Therefore, all names, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental. Chapter 29. The Birth of a New Freedom Movement for Muslims. The Sudanese apostate girl Ibtihal Taha Alamin considered the Muslims' liberation trial the official date on which the Muslims' liberation movement was born. The trial outcome was the beginning of the journey that she vowed to undertake for liberating her Muslim people. She held a press conference immediately after the court acquitted her of the hate speech charge. The main focus of the conference is to question Muslim apostate girl Ibtihal on her new proposal. The media people asked her questions about what she called the Muslims' liberation movement. "What is the main objective of your proposal of liberating Muslims?" asked a journalist. "The answer to your question is already included in the question itself," replied the freed Sudanese girl Ibtihal while smiling happily. "The main goal of my new proposal is to help Muslims realize that they are captives to their tyrannical and dangerous religious beliefs." "You mean all Muslims or just some terrorist groups such as the jihadists of ISIS or Al-Qaeda and Taliban?" "I do believe that all Muslims believe the verses of the Quran and hadiths of the Prophet of Islam are applicable to all times and all places. Accordingly, the new proposal is meant to initiate the beginning of a movement to liberate all Muslims of the world from their own belief system. Muslims are hostages to dangerous religious beliefs that justify the killing of unbelievers who refuse to embrace Islam, the intimidation of Christians and Jews, the slaughter of Hindus and Buddhists, the oppression and abuse of women, the killing of an apostate from Islam, the prohibition of any new reading of their religious texts, etc. I am pioneering a movement to highlight those dangerous Islamic teachings of the Quran and hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad and helps Muslims to forsake them, and then their minds will be emancipated from them." "Why do you want to liberate a person who doesn't ask you to liberate him?" "Freedom is not a choice, it is a right. No one can say I don't want to be set free. It is his right whether he accepts it or rejects it. I am not proposing a new religion and trying to force any Muslim man or a Muslim woman to accept it whether he or she likes it or not. It is an offer to liberate him or her, and it is up to them to take it or leave it. Who has given you the right to do so? My conscience and my bitter experience of being born and brought up as a Muslim girl have given me that right to help other Muslim prisoners be set free from the bondage of that dangerous belief system. Why don't you help Jews, Christians, Buddhists, or Hindus be liberated from their erroneous religious beliefs? And on which basis do you determine which religion is right and which religion is wrong? First of all, I have never said I am going to help Muslims be liberated from their wrong religion. I am proposing a movement to liberate Muslims from their dangerous beliefs. Besides being imprisoned by their tyrannical religion, Muslims themselves are victimized by those evil teachings. The bloody history of Islam revealed that Muslims suffered from their beliefs more than any followers of other religions. Secondly, I am not arguing against right and wrong in Islam. I am not distinguishing between Christianity and Islam or Hinduism and Buddhism and showing which one is right and which one is wrong. My proposal is to point out the dangers of Islamic beliefs and help Muslims be liberated from them. Thirdly, the world today has no problem with Christians, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, and atheists. Religious terrorism is deeply rooted in the teachings of the Quran and the hadiths of Muhammad. Therefore, we have Muslim terrorists everywhere, but we never hear of Christian or Buddhist terrorists. We have never heard of a Jew, a Christian, a Hindu, a Buddhist, or an atheist who blew up his body in smithereens and took the lives of many innocent people, including women and children. In every continent and country, suicide missions were carried out by Muslim terrorists only. In fact, you can never convince a Jew, an atheist, a Hindu, or a Christian to blow up his body in bits and pieces to please his God and enter paradise and get 72 virgins and rivers of milk and honey except for a Muslim. You are undertaking an extremely dangerous movement. Who is going to follow you among the Muslims without exposing himself or herself to the danger of being killed as an apostate? I understand the danger involved in forsaking Islam. But in every freedom movement of the past, many people sacrificed their lives for the coming generations. If many Muslims accept my proposal, then it would be an international problem if thousands of freed Muslims are slaughtered openly by their governments. At that time, Muslim countries would be forced by the international community to forsake the law of apostasy as they had been compelled in the past to abolish the slavery system, even though the Sharia law approves it until today, and it's being taught in Muslim schools and universities until the present moment. How are you going to finance your project? Through donations. Who is going to donate his money to finance such a crazy and impractical proposal? Well, there are always crazy people like me who believe in the impossible. After answering this last question, the genius Sudanese woman Ibtihal ended her press conference. The press conference at the beginning of the Muslims' liberation movement has been considered one of the longest press conferences in the world. The controversial female author has been asked many negative and pessimistic questions. Almost every question is meant either to mock her new proposal or discourage her from initiating such a freedom movement. Even so, she sincerely answered each and every question. She has not wavered in her belief in her new proposal, and every question strengthened her belief to continue with the Muslims' Liberation Movement project. Chapter 30. The Manifesto and the Base of the Muslims' Liberation Movement. Shortly after the trial, the female author Dr. Ibtihal wrote her second controversial book, which is later considered the manifesto of her new project. In this second book, she outlined the objectives of her new proposal. She also stated the near and far goals of the Muslims' liberation movement. She called for universal condemnation of the law of apostasy in Islam. She wants the United Nations organization to threaten to excommunicate each Muslim country that still included the law of apostasy in the list of its capital punishments. The general objectives of the Muslims' liberation movement are to highlight the dangerous teachings of the Quran and Sunnah and to make universal awareness that modern religious terrorism is deeply rooted and grounded in the teachings of the Quran and hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad. By the way, there are 60,000 authentic hadiths of the founder of Islam, whereas there are only 6,236 verses in the Quran. Therefore, more than 75% of the teachings of the Sharia had been taken from the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad. The woman founder of the new proposal, Ibtihal, argued that although not every Muslim is a terrorist, but every Muslim man and a Muslima woman is the potential to be one. The movement is to help Muslims to understand the danger of their beliefs and to help any liberated Muslim man or Muslima woman flee his country due to his or her apostasy from Islam. Finally, it must provide psychological and spiritual counseling to Muslims who are freed from their dangerous tyrannical beliefs and misogynistic teachings of the Quran and hadiths of Muhammad. The new controversial book of the genius Sudanese female author Ibtihal is met with universal outcry from Muslims. They have collectively considered it another unjustified open attack on the religion of Islam. Some Muslim critics who live in the West said that the new provocative book is meant to demonize 1.5 billion Muslims in the world. It also aims to dehumanize them and consider them dangerous satanic worshippers. Some Muslim scholars accused the Jews of plotting a new conspiracy against Islam and said that some Israeli Zionists are behind the negative and hostile writings and speeches of the Muslim apostate woman Dr. Ibtihal. For them, the despicable Muslim apostate woman Ibtihal is just like a paid female professional soldier. According to them, she is used by those Zionists to demolish the religion of Islam because she is from an Islamic background. While some Muslim scholars decided to draft books to refute every word that the despicable Sudanese woman Ibtihal wrote or spoke against Islam. Also, the Muslims' liberation movement is hotly debated among Western thinkers. Some critics considered her movement an extremely dangerous movement that would stir up religious strife, and at the same time, it might contribute to religious intolerance. Despite the many critiques, some critics espoused the project and considered it worth a try. Other critics saw the project as impractical. The new book has been placed under ban all over Muslim countries. Some Arab countries threaten to execute anyone who has in his possession the new book of the blasphemous Sudanese woman. For some preventative measures, India banned the 2 controversial books of Dr. Ibtihal, including all her speeches. The first country to offer a platform for the Sudanese female controversial author Ibtihal to speak about her new movement in the United States of America. Shortly after the release of her new book, Ibtihal received an official invitation from Oprah Winfrey. Due to her refugee status, she could not be able to fly immediately to the States. She became a resettled female refugee in Germany as soon as she returned from the Middle East. Likewise, a refugee man in the Netherlands invited the Muslim apostate girl Ibtihal to come and speak in his church, but for the same reason, she could not make her trip to his church without a passport. He is likewise a Sudanese apostate man who was born and brought up in a Muslim family in Darfur province. He too miraculously escaped his imminent execution due to his conversion from Islam to Christianity. The Sudanese apostate girl Ibtihal once again began to think of immigrating to Canada. She doesn't want to live in Germany because of the huge presence of immigrant Muslims from the Middle East and other Muslim countries who came from Asia and Africa. She is scared that some of those Muslim migrants may sooner or later plot her assassination. By then, the landed immigrant visa she received in the UK to Canada had expired because she did not make her trip within the limited period of 6 months from the date of its issue. She approached the Canadian Embassy in Berlin and reapplied for her resettlement. The Canadian Embassy approved her application and reissued a newly resettlement immigrant visa to her. By this time, Dr. Ibtihal spent 9 months in Copenhagen City before she immigrated to Toronto City. During those 9 months, she escaped 2 assassination attempts by Muslim terrorists. The first attempt occurred prior to her Muslim liberation trial, which is called the Modern Monkey Trial in the West. The terrorists waited in the street for her coming, but the German police foiled the plot and arrested them an hour before her arrival in the court. The second attempt happened on the same day after the press conference. Once again, the German police discovered the plot prior to its implementation and arrested the terrorist snipers who stationed themselves on top of a high building inhabited mainly by Muslim immigrants from Turkey, Morocco, Algeria, and other African, Middle Eastern, and Asian countries. They were 7 dangerous snipers, and each one of them was armed with a long-range Kalashnikov. Nevertheless, the targeted female victim, Ibtihal, did not know about those 2 attempts except through the media the next day after the Copenhagen Police Authority made them public in the local media. As a consequence of that, she stopped appearing in public until the day she left Germany. Her trip had been planned in full secrecy. Even the German police were not aware of it until she left the country through Frankfurt International Airport. When the media discovered and announced her departure, she had already landed at the Toronto International Airport. This time, Dr. Ibtihal disguised herself as a Muslim woman and made her trip safely to Canada. She put on a black burqa that covered her entire body from head to foot. She understood that the Islamic demeaning burqa sometimes could be a blessing in disguise. As soon as she arrived in Toronto, the Sudanese resettled refugee girl Ibtihal Taha Al-Amin announced through the media that Canada would be her permanent home and the base of her new project, which she named the Muslims Liberation Movement. Chapter 31. The controversial female author on the Oprah show. Dr. Ibtihal contacted the Oprah show as soon as she reached Canada. Oprah immediately arranged her trip from Toronto to Chicago. During her short stay in the USA, the resettled Sudanese refugee girl in Canada has been booked in a beautiful 5-star hotel in downtown Chicago. The city is not new to her. She could still remember her brief stay in that multi-ethnic city. Sadly, Chicago has revived a deep wound in the heart of the Muslim apostate girl Ibtihal. In that city, she received the first call from the jihadi terrorists in Chad who kidnapped her Christian lover, Dr. Samir. Dr. Ibtihal felt as if the city itself is responsible and conspired with those wicked terrorists who deprived her of the love of her life. After that call, her life turned into a horrifying nightmare. That call took her lover from her forever and altered the course of her life ever since. In Chicago City, she became pregnant by a tiny idea and conceived and grew inside her mind. That idea, like a baby, began to grow into her intellectual womb until one day it was born as a freedom movement that meant to liberate over 1.5 billion Muslim hostages and prisoners from a dangerous satanic cult euphemistically called Islam, the religion of peace. Besides, the city reminded her of the ill treatment of the Sudanese Christians who accused her of being an imposter Arab woman and a false Muslim female apostate who claimed to be a Christian girl. Therefore, there is nothing good she could remember in Chicago City. Oprah Winfrey invited a Muslim family on the same day she invited Dr. Ibtihal to talk about her new project of liberating Muslims from their belief system, which she believes to have imprisoned them for over 14 centuries. The parents of that family were born and brought up in the Middle East, but their 3 children were born and raised in the States. The family has 2 daughters, one is 19 and the other is 16, and a son, who is 21-year-old. The 2 daughters are dressed up in tight miniskirts that expose their thighs and hips and short t-shirts that revealed most of their upper bodies. Half of their big sexy boobs are visible. The son is put on blue jeans and a t-shirt. Even so, the mother covered her body with a huge Islamic abaya and hijab that hid everything about her body except half of her round face. The father is wearing a dress suit that made him look as if he is not the husband of that Muslima woman. In short, the father and his 3 children dressed up in a way to refute the new theory of Dr. Ibtihal that Muslims would remain the same no matter how long they lived in the West. The teenage girls are meant to show that Muslim women are not oppressed as Dr. Ibtihal claimed in her speeches. But the mother of those pretty young girls is sitting between her daughters, son, and husband as if someone has drawn a picture at the time of the Prophet Muhammad and somehow inserted by mistake 2 jet fighters, 1 drone, and a soldier with an AK-47 Kalashnikov on either side of a female mujahid warrior on a horseback with an unsheathed sword dripping blood in her hand. Although the mother spent over 20 years in the States, she is not yet Americanized. It seemed that she has been stuck in her Middle East Islamic culture forever. Oprah Winfrey, with her charming voice and commanding personality, introduced Dr. Ibtihal and welcomed her to the show. She also welcomed the Muslim family. Then she requested Dr. Ibtihal to explain to her audience her new proposal of liberating Muslims from their religion. Dr. Ibtihal spoke briefly about her Muslims liberation movement. As soon as she finished, Oprah began to talk to her about the acceptability and practicability of her new movement. First of all, said Oprah, I am glad that you accepted the invitation to come and speak on my show about your Muslims liberation movement. I always appreciate a strong woman like you who can fight against the injustice and persecution of her society and still stand against all odds with her head high. I know you have gone through a lot before you reached this height. Despite that, I talked to so many Muslim families about your project, but all of them disagreed with you and considered your proposal an attack on their religion. Those families said to me, you do not understand the pure message of Islam. According to them, Islam is the religion of peace and tolerance. They further said, their holy prophet is an ideal of moral perfection and was sent by God as a mercy to mankind. They also said that all the hadiths you used in your speeches and writings are not authentic sayings of the Prophet of Islam. They were invented by some Jewish scribes and injected into the mothers of the Islamic books in order to distort their beautiful religion and spoil the aromatic biography of their infallible prophet. Moreover, they said the verses of the Quran you quoted in your writings and speeches were misquoted and used individually without showing the verses that were revealed before and after them. That means the Quranic verses should be understood as a whole and not individually. Can you, dear Ibtihal, respond to these criticisms? To begin with, once again, I would like to thank Oprah for giving me such an honorable opportunity of speaking on one of the most popular and watched shows in the world. My new proposal is meant to solve one of the most chronic problems in our world today. Islamic terrorism has become a never-ending and insoluble problem in our time. This problem, in my opinion, cannot be solved through military combat or political or religious debates. It is next to impossible to finish all Muslim terrorists in the world. War on terror would only increase the number of terrorists. Muslim terrorists would not likely sit down and debate intellectually or negotiate politically with people they have already labeled as infidels and enemies who deserve to be killed. The only possible solution for religious terrorism is to expose its causes and uproot them. I believe the only solution is to liberate Muslims from their religious beliefs that justify crimes against humanity. Having said that, I would like to respond to the criticisms of those Muslim families you talk to. First of all, I have never quoted in my speeches and writings any hadith of the Prophet Muhammad that was not authentic and approved by Muslim scholars. Secondly, every Muslim scholar understands that there are verses of the Quran that are abrogated or their legal power nullified. Ali ibn Abi Talib, the fourth caliph and the husband of the Prophet's daughter, Fatima al-Zahra, said no one can interpret the Quran without knowing the abrogating verses and the verses that abrogated them. I would like to quote a famous verse known as the verse of the sword. But when the forbidden months are past, then fight and slay the pagans wherever you find them, and seize them, beleaguer them, and lie in wait for them in every stratagem of war. But if they repent, and establish regular prayers and practice regular charity, that means they became Muslims, then open the way for them. For Allah is often forgiving, most merciful. Surah Al-Tawbah 9, verse 5. This is the infamous verse of the sword. According to the Muslim scholar Ibn al-Arabi, everything in the Quran which speaks about forgiveness for unbelievers and avoiding killing them has been abrogated by the verse of the sword. This verse has abrogated 124 verses. It is a well-known fact among all Muslim scholars and the four founders of schools of the Sharia that while the Prophet Muhammad was in Mecca, he taught freedom of faith. After he immigrated from Mecca to Medina, and after the great battle of Badr, and the change from the state of weakness to the state of power, came the Nasikh verses to abrogate the freedom of faith and ordered Muslims to fight in jihad and kill non-Muslims if they refuse Islam. The Prophet Muhammad openly admitted that God had sent him to convert people to Islam by the sword and terrorize those who refused his message and confiscate their wealth, properties, cattle, women, children, and slaves. I can quote some of the Prophet's hadiths to support my words. The Prophet Muhammad said, "I have been granted victory through terrorism and the booty of my enemies became permissible to me." Again, he said, "I have been sent with the sword between my hands so that no one should be worshipped except Allah." There is a well-known hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, which is found in 113 reliable Islamic books. This hadith could also be found in Sahih Muslim and Sahih al-Bukhari. The Prophet said in this hadith, "I have been commanded to fight people until they bear witness that there is no God, but Allah and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. If they say it, they forbid me their wealth and blood." In this hadith, the Prophet said clearly that if anyone refuses to accept him as a messenger of Allah, then he has the right to kill him and possess his wealth, women, children, house, and other property. The Quran also supports the words of the Prophet Muhammad that God sent him to terrorize those who reject his message. I can also mention a few verses from the Quran to prove my claim. The people of the book, Jews of Medina, who aided them, Allah did take them down from their strongholds and cast terror into their hearts. So that some you have slaughtered and others you made prisoners. Surah Al-Ahzab 33, verse 26. Soon shall we put terror into the hearts of the unbelievers, for that they joined companions with Allah, for which he had sent no authority. Their abode will be the fire, and evil is the home of the wrongdoers. Surah Al-Imran 3, verse 151. The punishment of those who wage war against Allah and His Messenger and strive with might and main for mischief through the land is execution or crucifixion, or the cutting off of hands and feet from opposite sides, or exile from the land. That is their disgrace in this world, and a heavy punishment is theirs in the hereafter. Surah Al-Ma'idah 5, verse 34. Commenting on some verses of the Quran which teach violence, in Surah Al-Baqarah 2, verses 191, 193, Surah Al-Nisa 4, verses 76, 89, 91, Surah Al-Tawbah 9, verses 5, 12, 14, and 29, and Surah Al-Anfal 8, verse 39. The Egyptian scholar Khalil Abdul Karim says, "These verses carry serious orders of killing the tribes that refuse to believe in the religion that is preached by Muhammad." And from the other side, there are hadiths issued by the Prophet that confirm this meaning very clearly, by which we mean killing anyone who refuses Islam. The Prophet Muhammad said, I have been commanded to fight the people until they bear witness that there is no God except Allah and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. If they say it, they forbid from me their wealth and blood. The meaning of noncompliance is that anyone refuses to witness or utter the two shahada, I bear witness that there is no God, but Allah and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. There would be no protection for his wealth, women, children, and blood. Accordingly, killing the one who refuses to utter the two shahada is an obligation to every Muslim without exception. The message of Muhammad to all the tribes is to accept Islam and you will be safe. Any tribe or an individual who refuses this offer would expose himself to physical annihilation, and his wealth, women, children, and slave girls would be taken by the Muslims, citing Khalil Abdul Karim 1999. Pages 42 to 44. No Muslim scholar can deny that the verses of the Quran and the hadiths of Muhammad commanded Islam is to be spread by the use of military force. The history of Islam is a strong testimony to this fact. Only those Muslims who practice the teaching of taqiyya hide this fact. Taqiyya is the teaching of the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad which permits Muslims to lie to non-Muslims. See the Quran in Surah An-Nahl 16, verse 106 and Surah Al-Imran 3, verse 28. It is currently employed in fending off and neutralizing any criticism of Islam or Muslims. Falsehoods told to prevent the denigration of Islam, to protect oneself, or to promote the cause of Islam are sanctioned in the Quran and Sunnah, including lying under oath in testimony before a court, deceiving by making distorted statements to the media such as the claim that Islam is a religion of peace. In light of this, there are three types of Muslims in the world. The first is the one who understands the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad and the Quran. This type of Muslim hates everyone that is not Muslim like him and looks for the opportunity to spread his religion by all means available to him. This Muslim divides the world into Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb. In other words, the world for him is divided into the countries of Islam where the Sharia law is the governing law, and the countries of the enemies or places of war where man-made law or secular laws govern the infidels. The second type of a Muslim knows the teachings of the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad, but he doesn't want to practice them. This type of Muslim practices taqiyya when he lives in Dar al-Harb or the lands of the infidels such as Europe and America. The third type of Muslim is a confused person who does not know the difference between the abrogated verses and their abrogators. The first type can easily change this third type of a Muslim into a terrorist. Unfortunately, the third type forms 75% of the Muslim population in the world. Islam strictly forbids its followers from trying to understand the Quran by themselves. Muslims always look for an imam and mufti to explain to them what they are supposed to do and not to do. They never look into their Quran for learning, but they just recite its verses out of religious duties and obligations. In my opinion, those Muslim families you talked to are either the second or third type of Muslims. Okay, Miss Ibtihal, interrupted Oprah. I have here in the studio a Muslim family, and I would like you to talk to them about your Muslims liberation movement and see what their opinions about it. Here is Mr. Salah al-Din, his wife Sakina Shams al-Din, his two daughters Rasha and Shadia, and his son Ahmed. First, let us hear what they're going to say about your Muslims liberation movement. Well, in our Islamic culture the man of the family speaks first, said Mr. Salah al-Din angrily. First of all, I don't think this woman understands Islam at all. Secondly, she claimed that she is going to liberate Muslims from their faith, but she has not been liberated from her religious bigotry. The religion of Islam is the religion of adaptation. Wherever Muslims went, they adapted the culture of that place. Look at my family now. If we are living in the Middle East, we dress and behave like the people of that culture. I gave my two daughters the choice to dress up like the Arabs or like the Americans. They chose to dress up like the Americans and they are free to do so. But my wife refused to change her cultural dress and she is free to do so too. Thirdly, Islam never forces people to accept it. Well, said the Muslim female apostate girl Ibtihal while smiling at the family members of Mr. Salah al-Din, the Sharia law never gives you the choice to decide how you would like to dress up. It prescribes a religious dress code for women. Every woman who refuses to comply with that Islamic dress would be flogged. Your two daughters chose to dress up as Westerners because they are living in a free society which gave them that right. However, if they go to Saudi Arabia or any other Muslim country which is implementing the Sharia law, they will be forced by the correctional police of Allah to put on an abaya and a hijab. For instance, in my country Sudan, a girl will be severely flogged if she puts on a trouser. You said Islam never forced people to accept it, but you did not explain to us what the Muslim mujahideen did with their horses and swords when they invaded the surrounding Christian countries. I don't think any person today can claim that Islamic invasions, which are known as al-Futuhat al-Islamiyya, were done peacefully without the use of the sword. But those invasions were ordered by the exalted Allah, shouted Mr. Salah al-Din. Wait a minute, said Oprah. You have just said Islam does not force people to accept it, and now you are telling us that your Allah ordered Muslim fighters to go and invade other countries. I haven't said that, shouted Mr. Salah al-Din angrily. Muslim mujahideen went to spread the light of Islam peacefully into those countries. But any person who carried a sword and tried to stop them from entering his country to spread Islam, then Muslims had the right to kill him and take his wealth and women as war booty. The mujahideen did not kill anyone just for the sake of killing him, looting his wealth and enslaving his women and children, as this woman always preaches. Anyone who tried to stop the light of truth from being spread in his country, Allah gave his mujahideen the right to kill him and inherit his wealth, women, children, and depose him of his land. In fact, you are supporting the words of Ibtihal rather than refuting them. You are agreeing that if anyone refused to allow Muslim fighters to invade his country and spread their religious beliefs was supposed to be killed because that was the commandment of Allah. That is exactly what the Prophet Muhammad said. I have been commanded to fight people until they bear witness that there is no God, but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. If they say it, they forbid me their wealth and blood. In these words, the Prophet of Islam said clearly that if anyone refused to accept him as a messenger of Allah, then he has the right to kill him and possess his wealth. Dr. Ibtihal became extremely shocked when she heard Oprah quoting her words exactly as if she is reading from a paper. But Mr. Salah al-Din has misunderstood the photographic memory of Oprah and thought there is a kind of hidden conspiracy between the two genius women. Therefore, he lost his control and began to shout angrily, "What did the American Marines do to the Iraqi soldiers who tried to stop them from invading Iraq? How many millions of Iraqi people did the American soldiers kill? One Iraqi girl was raped by 7 American Marines. 1 million Iraqi children had been already killed by the Western troops, and another 2 million Iraqis were murdered by those bloody, thirsty infidel soldiers." Wait a minute, Mr. Salah al-Din. We are not talking about politics. The American Marines did not go to Iraq to spread a religion, and please remember, not every American is supporting that occupation, although it was meant to stop a dictator like Saddam from building and possessing nuclear weapons. We are trying to know whether Islam allows its followers to use military force to spread it. The Sudanese woman Ibtihal presented strong arguments against Islam and proposed a new project known as the Muslims Liberation Movement. If you don't agree with her, try to refute her case. Can I say something? Said Mrs. Sakina Shams al-Din. Yes, sweetie. Please tell us what you think about the Muslims Liberation Movement's project. The only thing I want to say is that this woman is an apostate and unbeliever, and she is supposed to be killed. If she is in a Muslim country, her people will stone her to death before they take her to the Sharia court. That means you agree with the law of apostasy in Islam. No Muslim is allowed to forsake Islam and remain alive. This is the law of our religion. No one can change it. Our holy prophet commanded us to kill anyone who left Islam and embraced another religion. Okay, let us hear what your daughters and sons say about the Muslims Liberation Movement. I don't like this movement, said Shadia angrily. This woman has no right to tell us your religion is bad and you have to leave it. We are free to follow any religion we like. What Christians would think if a Muslim woman told them your religion is wrong and you have to leave it, otherwise the world will force you to change it. I haven't said the world has to force Muslims to leave their religion. Also, I have not said the religion of Islam is wrong. I have said that some teachings of the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad are dangerous to humanity. Muslims and non-Muslims are facing this same danger today. I have proposed that all Muslims need help, and my movement is meant to help them realize the danger they are following and facing. But who are you to tell us that? Are you a new prophetess? Shouted the son, who by then had become extremely outraged. I am not a new prophetess. No Muslim can survive if he claims to be a new prophet in Islam. Muhammad had shut the door to such a possibility forever when he claimed to be the seal and final prophet. I have the Spirit of God in me. He inspires and guides me to do something good to Muslims even better than what their prophet Muhammad did to them. You are a liar and a cursed woman, shouted Mr. Salah al-Din, who has also become incensed and began to shake in rage and foam in his mouth. The shoe of our holy prophet Muhammad is better than you. You have the devil in you. You have married yourself to Satan. The devil has climbed on your body and possessed your mind. You have sex with Satan. No, please, shouted Oprah. I have not brought you here to fight with my female guest. You have the right to disagree with her, but you have no right to insult her. You can be charged for calling names in public to someone who has not insulted you. I am so sorry, Miss Ibtihal, and please do not take it personally. Before we end the show, I would like you to say a few words to our audience. Never mind what Mr. Salah al-Din has said to me. I will not charge him for verbal assault. I can forgive him even if he threatens to kill me. I am used to this kind of reaction from Muslims. I wish he and his family can give serious thought to my proposal before they condemn it as the work of Satan. In the end, I would like to thank Oprah and her show for giving me the first platform to speak about my Muslims liberation movement. I also would like to encourage Muslims all over the world to read my writings and listen to my all-spoken speeches. To non-Muslims, I would like to invite them to join my liberation movement and participate in freeing over 1 billion humans and 500 million hostages and prisoners from the dangerous teachings of the Quran and the hadiths of the alleged prophet of God. Thank you again, Miss Ibtihal, and I wish you success in your sincere efforts. I wish from my heart your liberation movement can bear fruit soon while you are trying to help your own Muslim people and especially Muslim women. I would also like to thank the family of Mr. Salah al-Din, all audience in the studio, and others who are watching us through their televisions in their homes. Chapter 32. The New Followers of the Muslims Liberation Movement. The Oprah show has helped millions of Americans to understand the Muslims liberation movement of the Sudanese resettled refugee girl Ibtihal. The Muslim family projected a bad image of Islam and convinced many viewers that what the Muslim apostate woman Ibtihal said about that religion is true. The viewers were surprised to see a Muslim family that lived for over 20 years in America and behaved as if they are still in the Middle East. After the Oprah show, the female founder of the liberation movement received hundreds of letters from people wanting to join her new Muslim freedom movement. Some of them are Muslims and some are from other religions such as Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Baha'ism, and even some are religious people such as atheists and feminists. Some of them donated money to the Muslims liberation movement. The female CEO of the movement, Ibtihal, also received a quite big number of negative letters. Some criticized her new movement and some threatened her life. The Sudanese apostate girl, who is the female founder of the new liberation movement, has $50 million in her account when she arrived in Canada. It is the money she received from the Turkish government as compensation for torturing and raping her when she was in the Ankara women's prison. After the Oprah show, she also received $40,000 as a donation from some newly joined supporters. Oprah Winfrey has donated $10,000 to Ibtihal. Then Ibtihal decided to have an office for her Muslims liberation movement. The police authority of Toronto did not encourage her of pursuing such a religious movement because Canada is a multicultural society. The police authority suggested that she should change the name of her movement to the Muslim Friendship Movement. Moreover, the RCMP wants her to change the main objectives of her movement. Notwithstanding, Dr. Ibtihal has strongly refused either to change the name of her Muslims liberation movement or amend its objectives. The Canadian Police Authority reluctantly allowed her to open her office anyway. She has been advised to exercise due caution in her speeches and writings in order to ensure a friendly relationship with Canadian Muslims. Muslims in Toronto organized public demonstrations and demanded that the government of Ottawa should not allow such an anti-Islamic movement to make its base in a multicultural country like Canada. They also demanded that the government should place a ban on the writings and speeches of the Sudanese resettled refugee woman Ibtihal Taha al-Amin. Despite their protests, the Canadian government has not accepted their demands because they are contrary to the freedom of speech that is granted by the Canadian Constitution. When their legal approach failed, the Muslims in Toronto resorted to violence. Some Islamic terrorist group planted a bomb in a car near the building where Dr. Ibtihal has set her Muslims Liberation Movement office. The explosion damaged part of the building and killed 28 people, injured many, and caused damage to the other nearby 3 buildings. When the Islamic terrorist attack was executed, Dr. Ibtihal happened to be out of her office. Therefore, the cowardly terrorist attack forced her to postpone indefinitely the activities of her new liberation movement. After the Islamic terrorists resumed their repeated attempts to assassinate the controversial female author Ibtihal, who is considered Islam's enemy number 1, she received thousands of letters of encouragement from all over the world. Many people joined her movement and pledged to further her noble cause. Dr. Ibtihal changed her strategy and decided to run her movement from her residence. She began to prepare small leaflets in which she stated the general objectives of her movement. She also began to correspond with her followers and supporters and encouraged them to circulate those brochures among their social circles and workplaces. Ibtihal also received letters from Muslims in the Western countries as well as in the Muslim countries. They stated that they have been convinced by her speeches and writings that the faith they followed all their lives is a terrorist and misogynistic religion. Some of the writers of those letters preferred to hide their identities for safety purposes. Those who live in the Middle East refused to give their addresses to Ibtihal for fear of being caught and condemned as apostates and executed. Their writings have encouraged Ibtihal and assured her that her program of liberating Muslims from their dangerous beliefs began to work. Dr. Ibtihal noticed that most of the Muslims who accepted the Muslims' liberation movement are young women. But that has not come to her as a surprise because she knows Muslim women are the most abused women in the world.